I'm going to start this video off by saying that I am a fan of all of the Bioshock games, and while I did start with Infinite, I wouldn't say it's my favorite one in the series. That would probably go to Bioshock 1 because of the fact that it was the one that started it all, has one of the greatest twists in gaming in general, and it's kind of a masterpiece for a reason. That being said, Bioshock as a franchise is kind of flawed. Although, that's perfectly okay. Literally every video game that exists is flawed because all video games are an art form, art is human, and humans are imperfect by design. So therefore anything that we create is going to be imperfect. Just like this video, which I have no doubt that a bunch of people are going to disagree with me. Now, the point of this video is not to say, oh, this Bioshock game is the best, and oh, this Bioshock game is the worst. Rather, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on each of the games, what I see is good in them, and what I see is objectively flawed about them. I'm going to try not to make this video too long, and I don't have footage from every game here, because I wanted to go ahead and start recording my thoughts on this before they slip my mind, and I only have footage of Infinite to go off of. I might go back and get more footage later, but I can't guarantee that. But with that being said, yeah, let's just hop into my thoughts on the games. I'm going to start off by discussing Bioshock Infinite and its flaws, because this was my introduction to the series, and arguably this game is the most divisive. Nowadays, a lot of people look back on Infinite and think this is the worst game in the franchise. I'm not going to disagree with that, because again, I think all of these games are flawed in some way. And complaining about which one is the best and which one is the worst is kind of redundant. All of these games are fun in their own right. That being said, I definitely see why people don't like this game, or don't like it as much as the other two games. Bioshock 1 and 2 play way more like immersive sims than Bioshock Infinite, which is just a straight-up first-person shooter, but also with the Vigor magic system. I'm not going to disagree that with the immersive sim elements, I would probably enjoy the other two games a little bit more. Furthermore, the main thing that seems to get at people's minds when it comes to Infinite not being a good Bioshock game is the story. I am going to admit it right now, the story in Infinite kinda makes no sense. Technically, the story works up until you get to the end of Finkton. Because after you get to the end of Finkton, that's when they throw in the reality hopping, and once you start jumping realities, it becomes very difficult to keep track of where you are, what exactly you're doing, and why. For me to try to sum up how things happen, you hop realities at the start simply because you're trying to find a way to get the weapons for the deal with Fitzroy, but since you've left the original reality, there's kind of no point in keeping the deal, because if you don't even have a way to get back, which Elizabeth says that she's not even sure she can bring you guys back, then the Fitzroys of the other universes probably didn't make that deal with you yet, and therefore they're not really going to have leverage to give you back the airship. Hell, they might not even have the airship in the other realities. So, yeah, once you start hopping realities, stuff kinda stops making sense. Y'all can just look for another airship and try to find a way to leave from there. To be fair, the plot does kind of work as long as you're not thinking too much about it, but if you are starting to think critically about how the story works, then it will very quickly stop making sense. A lot of people were giving praise back when the game first came out and saying that it was one of the best FPS stories that you could experience. But looking back on it, it's a fine story, but it's just very convoluted and confusing. So yeah, the story of the game is definitely flawed, and that seems to be the reason why a lot of people look back on this game and say, oh, this is a terrible Bioshock game, the story is garbage, the gameplay is way too simplified. I mean, yeah, but it's not like there isn't stuff to like about the game. The presentation of the game, for example, is very lovely. The combat is very frantic, even if it's the simplified 2-weapon limit, but you have access to all your superpowers sort of thing. Which, yeah, the 2-weapon limit does kind of suck, and the way that upgrading weapons is just buying the upgrades from the machines instead of them changing the visuals, that also is kind of a missed opportunity. But it's not like the combat isn't fun. Plus, you also have the skylines to mess around with, which the fact that those exist is just impressive in general, and they're really fun to fight people with. Furthermore, this was the first game that really got me with its twist. Well, partially with the twist. I don't think I was paying that much attention to it back when I was first playing it. Although the reveal that Comstock and Booker are the same person is definitely a fun reveal for the ending. But more so, I just remember being shocked that the game would end with Booker getting killed. That wasn't something that had happened to me in a video game before. And while I understand why Booker had to die at the end there in order for the story to more or less end, yeah, it definitely threw me for a loop. Although, to be fair, it kind of doesn't help that if we're thinking about the multiverse concepts, that drowning Booker at the end of the game might not actually work. But, yeah, I'm not reading too hard into the story nowadays. I already know that the story is kind of dumb. I don't really play Infinite for its story. I mean, I might play it for some story beats, but I more so play Infinite because well, it's fun. I like the combat of the game. I like the style of the game. Having Elizabeth as a companion is fun. I wouldn't say that this game is absolute garbage. It's flawed, but hey, I like playing flawed games. It happens all the time. That's why Dishonored 2 is my favorite immersive sim, and a lot of people would definitely say, oh, Dishonored 2 is worse than Dishonored 1. I don't care. If I like playing the game, it's going to go down as one of my favorites. Besides, I can definitely point out flaws in the other Bioshock games, so we're going to do that now. So, Bioshock 1. Yes, the game is a masterpiece, and it's probably my favorite Bioshock game. But believe me, the game has its own flaws. First of all, the thing with the twist. Yes, the twist is lovely and all. But the game also isn't over after the twist, and most people agree that after the big reveal, the game kind of starts to lose people's attention and it starts to lose steam. I mean, yeah, we're near the end, but there's still plenty of game left to go. And the game doesn't exactly end on the best note. The Big Daddy escort mission that happens definitely annoys a lot of people. It didn't annoy me that much, but I definitely know that some people were annoyed by it. And furthermore, the game ends with a boss fight. And the boss fight is very gamey and kind of not that satisfying. Again, I didn't mind it as much, but objectively, it is the weakest part of the game. Furthermore, the game sort of forces multiple endings, which apparently Ken Levine didn't want the multiple endings thing. That's what the higher-ups forced onto him. But yeah, that also sort of takes away from the game a little bit. It sort of forces you to play the game not for your own preferences, but for aiming for a specific ending. I have played and beaten Bioshock 1 at least twice, and have done both the good ending and the bad ending. The bad ending I did on New Game Plus. The good ending was for my first playthrough. The game is better if you play it for the good ending, but if you are playing the game for the ending, you are going to think a lot less about the moral quandary of the little sister decisions. That aside, the gameplay of Bioshock 1 is also a little bit dated. Now, there's nothing wrong with the game being old or anything like that, but the shooting mechanics are definitely of their time. If you're doing encounters in Bioshock 1, you basically need to avoid the ADSing like the plague, because the ADS is both stiff and loose at the same time. And aside from the gunplay being a bit dated, there's also the hacking. I do not hate the hacking, but a lot of people hate the hacking, because it is boring. It is just that pipe-moving game over and over and over again with not a lot of variation. I definitely know I've had my frustrations with the hacking sometimes, because unless you're using the tonics that let you make the hacking less cumbersome, yeah, it can be very annoying to try to hack everything. So, yeah, some older design flaws kind of make the first game also a bit flawed, aside from the fact that the story just stops being that interesting once you're in, like, the final quarter of the game. Well, maybe it doesn't stop being entirely interesting, but it definitely loses steam. But hey, losing steam only at the last quarter is way better than losing steam almost about halfway because your story stops making sense, right? Right? There's also stuff like late game enemies being kind of spongy unless you're using the research camera. Although I've also used the research camera and still the enemies can feel a little bit spongy. Also the research camera, because some people don't like the research camera. I've seen the Monty Zander videos. He does not like using that thing because it can be a bit of a break from the gameplay, which I can understand. I haven't been terribly bothered by the research camera either, but I definitely know I wasn't using it that much during my first playthrough. That just leaves us with Bioshock 2, which at this point in time is currently the one that I'm interested in the least. I don't hate the game at all. I like all of the Bioshock games, but this was the last game that I played in the franchise, and more importantly, I've only played through the game once at this point in time, compared to the other games which I've played at least twice. That's of course discounting the DLCs because I'm not counting the DLCs for this video. What are my thoughts on Bioshock 2? Well, it's good, but there were a lot of things I had to try to get used to compared to playing the first game. There are objective gameplay improvements. The fact that you're able to dual wield in Bioshock 2 is great. The fact that they made playing as a Big Daddy less crap compared to the first game is also great. The fact that they improved the hacking to basically make it almost perfect and not annoying in the slightest is really great. The fact that you can do substantial upgrades to your plasmids that have actual gameplay changes aside from just buffing the damage. That's incredible. The way that Rapture looks after basically being run down now that Ryan is gone. Really great stuff. So, what's my problem with Bioshock 2? I'd say that the problem that I have with 2 is more so the pull of the story isn't quite as strong compared to the first game. The second game's villain is Sophia Lamb, and you definitely have a good reason for wanting to go after her. You're playing as a Big Daddy, she has your little sister, she executes you at the start of the game, so yeah, you have a pretty solid reason to be against her and want to take her out, but it's not quite the same as the introduction you got to the city in the first game with a bunch of intrigue and mystery. We already know what Rapture's like in the second game, so there's not an insane amount of mystery to be in there. We're mostly just like exploring some different places in a city we've been to before. Although the places that we get to explore are definitely nice. Although I also have some more personal issues that I have dealing with Bioshock 2. The game is certainly more difficult than the first game, but the way that difficulty manifested sort of got on my nerves a few times. Mostly in the form of the Big Sisters. The Big Sisters will not leave you alone even after they kill you. I had an instance where I was in Pauper's Drop, wasted a bunch of resources trying to defeat a Big Sister, and then basically got stuck in a spawn die loop because they don't leave you alone once they're in the area. It kind of incentivizes you to avoid dealing with the little sisters in any capacity, because summoning in a Big Sister and not being at the strength to deal with one can pretty much screw you over for quite a while, and it definitely turned me off of the game for a portion of time. Aside from that, the game's story, while also nice, it's probably the most consistent one in the franchise. Because unlike Bioshock Infinite, it doesn't stop making sense, and unlike Bioshock 1, it's not exactly to the point where you basically stop being interested by the time you get to the end. But when I was playing Bioshock 2, by the time I was in Persephone, I wanted the game to be over. I wanted to finish playing it, and I did not want to think about it much afterwards. I still enjoyed the game, it's just, I don't know, I got kind of burned out by it. I don't know exactly why, but Persephone is the only time in a Bioshock game where I remember that I was objectively skipping rooms and not trying to explore around everywhere, because I just want it to be done. Furthermore, the level design in Bioshock 2 is more linear compared to the first game. The first game was basically, you're given a giant hub and a bunch of areas to branch into that you could just go and explore at your leisure. But from what I've noticed, Bioshock 2 is more likely to funnel you in. And certain areas will just be locked off to you until a certain point, and then you'll be able to check them out later. Which, to be fair, Infinite also does something similar, where you can't make progression in certain points until you activate certain story beats. So, yeah, the linearity of the story starting in 2 also has a bit of a part to play into why it's flawed. But again, the gameplay improvements over 1 are certainly there. And after I do a second playthrough of the game, I'll probably have different thoughts on it. Plus, Bioshock 2 has Minerva's Den, and to my knowledge, Minerva's Den is the best DLC that exists in any of the games, and might be the best Bioshock content on its own, because of the fact that it might not inherently share any flaws. But again, I'm not certain of that yet, and I'm not counting the DLC anyway. I'll have to play it for myself at some point. So there we go. Every single Bioshock game that exists in the series is flawed. The first game starts to run out of steam by the end, and the gameplay is dated compared to the other two games. Bioshock 2 is more linear in its level design, and the story is not going to pull people in as well as the intrigue from the first game and the intrigue from Infinite, because Infinite gave us a new setting, and 2 takes place in Rapture again. And Infinite is flawed because the story is more nonsensical than the other ones, and it plays way more like a first-person shooter than the immersive sims of the games of its past. Every Bioshock game in the franchise is flawed because all of the Bioshock games are art, and art is human, and humans are imperfect. So yeah, no duh, all of these are going to be flawed in some way or another. That doesn't stop people from liking these games. So yeah, you might have your own opinion as to which game you think is the best. But objectively, all of these games are great. Which one is the best is kind of stupid to argue about. Which one is the worst is also kind of stupid to argue about. If you like the first game more, that's completely fine. If you like the second game more, that's completely fine. If you like Infinite more than the other ones, that is completely fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions. I would kind of like it if people would stop screaming about, oh, your opinions are invalidated because you like Infinite, or oh, your opinion is invalidated because you like 2, or oh, you like 1 so you're elitist, we shouldn't listen to you. Like, Jesus, can't we all just agree that Bioshock is fun and just play the games? Besides, all of you are wrong. The best Bioshock game is System Shock, because System Shock started it all. And yes, that's a joke, because even playing the remake, the ending of System Shock 1, to my knowledge, is not that good. So I guess one could say, oh, the best Bioshock game is System Shock 2. But I haven't played System Shock 2, so I'm not gonna say that. No, the best Bioshock game is Dishonored 2. And then after that is Deathloop. This has been some random owl on the internet screaming about a game franchise that he likes. Thank you and have a good day.